Nevertheless, the dimness shall not be such as was in her vexation, when at the first he lightly afflicted the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, and afterward did more grievously afflict her by the way of the sea beyond Jordan, in Galilee of the nations.
All right, good morning, and welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. And we're continuing in the book of Hosea. For everyone who shows up at 7, I appreciate everyone showing up on time. I'm sorry, sometimes it's just the way things are. First thing is, my life is not always consistent. All right, so, okay. So, in verse 5, we're continuing about his, he's going on about this, and let's see what he goes on to say. Yeah, they don't turn back to the Lord. There's a lot of different, each verse has its own sort of, they're all interconnected, and it's not always super obvious, the connection, but we'll try to make them as much as possible. Yeah, I just want to review real quick. Okay. And the pride of Israel doth testify to his face. Therefore shall Israel and Ephraim fall in their iniquity. Judah also shall fall with them. So pride goeth before a fall, right? And their pride testifies against them, it says. Or testify to them. Their pride is their testimony to them. And what does your pride testify? Well, you don't deserve this. Your ways are right. Right? That's what our pride will say. If we listen to our pride, I just want to like that's whatever. It's like having to monitor what's going on at the same time. Like, oh, gee, my hair looks wild today. All right. Anyways, I'm going to ignore that. because the pride is unnecessary. All right, the pride of Israel doth testify to his face. Therefore shall Israel and Ephraim fall in their iniquity. If our pride is speaking to us, if what we're listening to is our pride, if it's what's testifying, if we listen to our conscience, and that's the testimony that enters into our hearts. If we're listening to our hearts, if we're looking in the mirror and we see, and our conscience speaks things, the truth, hopefully. I think the idea behind conscience is that your conscience is that part of your mind, and not your conscious mind necessarily, but that thing that maybe eats at you sometimes. And these are old terms applied to things that people still don't understand completely. But the part that tells you and eats at you morally that things are wrong or right, it tells you what you ought to do, or that testify, in a sense, your conscience can bear witness against you. Yeah, I mean, like saying, like, what you just did was terrible. What you just did was wrong. You may have something you do, and then you're like, oh, that's wrong. But oftentimes, or you may have a clean conscience. But of course, other times it's not your conscience speaking to you; it's your pride. Your pride is saying to you, "I did nothing wrong." Your pride says to you, "I am whatever. I'm great. I wouldn't do such a thing. I'm a good person. There's no such thing." Like they're behaving selfishly. They're behaving blah 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 blah. It's a testimony of our pride. You look in the mirror and you see someone who can do no wrong. You look in the mirror and you see someone who is worthy of every blessing, who is worthy of all praise. And your pride testifies. That's an interesting idea. That's not a widespread idea, and the scripture does not say that specific thing very often in that way. As far as your pride testifying to you, it's an interesting concept. But there's definitely one worth thinking about. I mean, we could definitely go on and on about that. I think it's also pretty easy when it's just said to you like that. It's pretty easy to lay a grasp on. And we should know we should be careful to what, like Jesus said, take heed how you hear and with what measure you meet. How you hear things in the world and how you hear yourself, how you take in communications from other people, how you take in communications from your own mind. You should take heed as to what the nature of those things really is. Because if we listen to the wrong voices, if we're listening to the voices that we hear wrongly, if we're corrupting the communication with our own mind, and if it's being motivated by something like pride, but the pride isn't the only thing, obviously, that can corrupt the communication. Hatred, envy, spite, all kinds of things or fear, all kinds of things can cause communications received from the outside world, or from, like meaning, because it's like, your pride's testifying to your face. I immediately think of like a mirror. You're looking in the mirror, and what do you see? Your pride is is testifying to you. But also other things like a prophet comes and speaks, right? A prophet comes. Should I listen to the prophet? And pride steps in and says, no, you should not listen. In fact, I know that I've engaged in a number of online arguments with people. And I'll call them arguments, whatever. It's discussions, peaceful, but whatever. Both Christians, non-Christians. And I notice that sometimes when you get someone rhetorically, when you get them trapped, whenever someone, I've only a few times seen someone like on the fly humble themselves and, and like say, like, wow, yeah, you're right, I was wrong. But as whatever, I'm not gonna be falsely humble or whatever. But it's like one of those times I myself was in that position, and I can tell you though, the great thing about it is, it's so powerful. Like by allowing someone else to be right when I knew I was wrong, and not allowing my pride to get in the way. I made an incredible impression on them. As far as like they were able to see that, like, and especially if there's someone who argues a lot, if you argue a lot, how difficult it is to actually persuade the person you're arguing against. And in fact, you'll know that, like, actually, what you want is to have an audience persuaded. And the thing is, it's usually the presence of the audience or the public nature of the discourse that makes it so difficult for people to admit fault. And I have to admit, when I was being confronted and admitting I was wrong, that did happen in a private conversation. So, it wasn't that big of a step for me. So I wasn't in a public argument. I think I've admitted I was wrong in a public argument, but in things that I didn't really care that much about. It is hard when you care about a subject. Sometimes you have to go back and take stock yourself. It's pride can be deadly difficult to deal with and to overcome. But when you do, I do think there is power in being humble. Oh, there certainly is, in humbly accepting defeat. At least in the verbal arena, especially, it can be turned into something powerful. Also, you can look weak in that, and that's, people are afraid of that, and rightly so, because it's like you're gonna look weak. Make things worse. All right. It's just hard. I feel like it's comical. I feel like whatever. I feel like I've got kind of faggy hair today. I don't know any other word for it. It's like something I try to avoid. I'm like, I didn't look in the mirror before I came in here. And it's a distraction, and it's ridiculous and stupid for me to be distracted by it. All right. So not verse 6, we got to finish verse 5. Okay, so, therefore they will fall in their iniquity and Judah shall fall with them. One of the things is with the Assyrian, the captivity, the kingdoms and the captivities. There's two kingdoms, right? We've discussed this many times, right? In this study. We're not going to go over that detail. But one detail I want to make you aware of that people are not often aware of is that during the Assyrian invasion, it wasn't just the northern kingdom that got carried away into captivity. It was also many in Judah. There were a lot of because the Assyrian invaded Judah also, took all the defense cities and got stopped only at Jerusalem. He couldn't take the capital. And many of the people of Judah were also carried into captivity with the people of Israel. Because, it said, yet let not Judah offend. I still think there might have been sarcasm in that. Because their offenses were lesser, but there was still, and maybe there was a sort of a snooty like, well, in Judah we don't do things like that. Yeah, we don't worship golden calves and Asherah, but we do have altars under every green tree and on every high hill. And they had many of the same problems because they were just one people essentially with two kings because of the civil war that existed between Israel. There was different periods where they were at peace and where they were cooperating and where they were less cooperative. And that goes in the history of the Kings and Chronicles of the Kings and the Chronicles of the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. But the big fall was Israel for sure. Israel and Ephraim. Ephraim being the leading tribe again. We've covered that extensively. Pride will lead us to that fall. Because though for fear of exposure we may not acknowledge it's not just about argumentatively acknowledging our wrong. A lot of times it's acknowledging our sin. There's a lot of things people do that are sinful. And they don't want to acknowledge them as sinful. That's one of the most dangerous things of all. It's one thing I have run into in regards to people who have enthusiasm for the idea of holiness and righteousness, that they want to perform it. They want their lives to be filled with righteousness, right? And they want to say that, when Jesus came into my life, I put away sin. Or say that his power came in and delivered me completely from sin. And now I'm sin-free. That's what they want to say. And they want to make a declaration of sinlessness. They may go to a church where holiness is emphasized. And it's preached. And then they may come to believe, because a lot of times when we first convert, there's a great amount of zeal. And we have maybe put off a lot of obvious sins, stop doing them. Because, the Lord coming in your life can have a powerful effect and change things immediately. And often does for many people. And their lives are just turned around and they change. They stop doing drugs. They become sexually responsible, sexually chaste. They start keeping themselves as God would have them keep them. They would look at themselves as a new creature in Christ very seriously, and walk with that integrity which they maybe never had before possessed, but now they have you're written into their hearts. And I've seen people who had continued in a righteous mindset for a long time, but their character was not perfect. They were not anything nearly like Christ. And sometimes in their interpersonal relationships, like with people in church, they were very unrighteous, and they deny it. And you couldn't tell them they'd done anything wrong. Because they'd get angry and you were attacking them, and any kind of accusation against them was taken like some sort of accusation of, not just like what happens is like an accusation of minor transgression becomes a major accusation because you're saying they're not perfect. So we have to have a very humble attitude. We want to be righteous. We want to be holy, but we have to truly be. I remember when I first started getting into this, when all the New Testament passages that were exhorting us to righteousness came, when I received the Holy Spirit, all of a sudden this stuff came into my view. And I was seeing the New Testament as, instead of like this collection of doctrines about, it was all doctrines and prophecies and facts and figures. And all of a sudden it like became something about the way I lived my life. I remember telling my friends who had been part of my Bible study up to that point, which had been running nonstop for 10 years at that point, over 10 years actually, more like 12 years. Well, they weren't all different people, but there was always a Bible study. And I remember telling them, and they said, "Well, like you couldn't ever be righteous because you'd be proud." And I always thought that was a funny thing because because obviously if you have pride, then you're not righteous. But if you are indeed righteous, you wouldn't be proud. Because you'd have a certain perspective on how you got there. And that's the thing. It's like if we truly want to be righteous, we have to be humble. You'll never be righteous if you can't humble yourself. If you can't humble yourself, you will never obtain righteousness. Humble yourself in the sight of the Lord and he will lift you up. Because it requires humility in the pursuit of righteousness, because you're going to think at some point you got so far. And then you're going to be confronted with facts about yourself. You're going to look in the mirror and things are going to say, there's going to be things coming at you. Maybe it'll be other people talking to you. What I'm saying? Whatever, even other people are like a mirror because they're looking at us and they're reporting. Like a mirror reports what we see, other people report to us. They may not be as accurate as a mirror, but a mirror can't tell certain things. A mirror can't relate. All it can show us is the outward. But I mean that metaphorical mirror. When you really take a look at yourself, you try to take yourself outside of yourself and look at yourself honestly and see yourself as other people see you. And in that, if we cannot humble ourselves in those situations, we're going to have difficulty. It's going to be a continual challenge to obtain righteousness until we can humble ourselves. So humility is so very, very important. Is one of the chief virtues. It's so chief. When it says all the things it ever says about Moses, one of the most important things that it ever says was that he was a humble man. Because that was a great characteristic for a man to have, to speak on behalf of God. Because it's one of the problems is people talk on behalf of God and people suspect they're lying. As far as about actually having any authority to speak. By what authority do you do these things? And it is, it's like, what authority do I have? People they go to seminary and they go for some particular denomination, then they get ordained and they have authority. People have authorized them. Other people who have been authorized by other people. There's like some chain of authorization that goes back to whatever. But like at no point did that ever get off the rails. It's all just perfect. It's like it never. Because here's the thing: you get on your authorization, you get one unauthorized person in the ministry, and then your whole scheme of having this whole thing mean something is out the window. But me personally, as far as I don't have any authority to do anything except to teach the scriptures. I do not think of myself as authorized to just declare to people God's will for whatever specific thing, unless at the moment, it's like you all may prophesy. So sometimes you speak for God, you don't even realize it, and then afterwards you see the Lord's will being communicated through you. And that doesn't make me a prophet. That just makes me a Christian. Because sometimes everyone, from the least to the greatest of us, sometimes we utter the word of God. But The authority is in the Scripture itself, that we should constantly teach these things, that we should rehearse them in each other's ears. That, you could look at the New Testament for your authorization, and it's there. But as far as to be considered an official blah 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 of this, and to be God's this, that, the other, where does that authorization? Where does the apostleship come from? It can only come from Christ Himself. And so then I am very skeptical, unless I see the hallmarks that go with that. I feel like I'm getting off the track. All right, they shall go with their flocks and their herds to seek the Lord, but they shall not find Him. He hath withdrawn Himself from them. That is a fearful thing, that God can withdraw Himself from people. Now, as a Christian, God isn't going to withdraw Himself from you. A sincere Christian. I get this all the time. Sometimes people are very humble and they're sincere, and they'll read the Scriptures and they'll say something like this. They'll say that God can have people that are supposed to be His people, but He withdraws Himself from them. This is people who are generationally idolatrous. You know what I mean? Like, I remember when I was first married, my wife and I participated with, I forget how we got to know these people. It's like someone invited us, because how did we get invited? Someone was trying to start a new church. And it was fun. It was interesting because we had no kids at the time. I remember this. And they were called Evangelical Covenant. And I was curious, well, what's that mean? What does that mean? It's like, well, and they didn't explain it fully, but it had something to do with like thinking that, like, the covenant with Abraham, and that there was something, they had some belief about, like, that there was that their children were special because they were their believers, that they had a special sort of inheritance. And I think this is also hinted at in the New Testament. It's like it says, the unbelieving husband is sanctified by the believing wife, else were your children defiled. There is a sort of inherited Christianity. I inherited Christianity. And most of us in the West did. Now, because like even I know someone who became they would see themselves as becoming a Christian when they were 19. Yeah. But of course they'd been raised in church, more or less. They'd been to communion and stuff like that, more or less. It was a Catholic church. They had like a Catholic experience, but they didn't see themselves as religious at all. And they remember praying to Mary and stuff like that, but they didn't see themselves as religious. But still, in the prophetic sense, they were. Like the whole nation is not a Christian. Like I wouldn't look at our nation and say the whole thing is to be regarded as Christian, but there are so many Christians that it's hard to distinguish it from it. And so the whole thing does kind of have that feel. Like, it's an odd thing because I don't think of Christianity as this national thing. Like Israel had their national religion was Judaism. And I don't think, we talk about Christian nations, they exist. And they did exist, and they have existed. But I mean, you think about how that came about. Like, your king converts to Christianity, and then your whole barbarous tribe converts to Christianity. There's something, I remember reading about this in history and thinking, like, something not quite right with that. European Christianity in the form of Roman Catholicism, sometimes it gets a bad rap of being kind of ineffectual, but it's like the way they spread it was by compulsion in a lot of cases. It was just like, all right, we're all Christians now. Everyone's going to church at the point of the sword. Because it's the king's orders. And people try to be devout in it. I have no doubt they try to take on devout Christianity and learn from it, and the priest would come and try to teach it to them. Because it's their opportunity. They're all accepting it. And that's not totally out of bounds either. Because even like Cornelius in the book of Acts, and his whole house accepted the Lord. They all were baptized. You know what I mean? The king makes the decision, but then everyone goes along with it. Thanks, Mr. Fly. Go away. So it doesn't have to be... There's too many flies right now. I said 1, 2, 3. it doesn't have to be necessarily a bad thing, but in some level, it's like I do think of it as far as the depths of Christianity is a relationship that exists between the individual and their Lord. A mass conversion is obviously going, like anything done en masse, it's going to have, there's going to be inefficiencies, meaning the process of converting everyone to Christian isn't going to happen as efficiently as it would as, say, let's say I do one person. You know what I mean? Like one person's, like if I try to convert a whole nation, let's say I have 1,000 priests and and I've got 100,000 people and they're all going to be Christians now. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not going to be, there's going to be some slipping through the cracks in that. And there's going to be some degree to which the kings themselves were doing it for political reasons. And this is all going to say that, like people will talk about Christianity faltering in the West and all that. And it's like, it was always built kind of rickety to begin with. But the core will always remain. There will always, even if it diminishes to some degree, it's growing in other places. Christianity is still growing. That's the funny part. They talk about, like, yes, I know in the West where it grew up, it is faltering, but it's again where it started among the Jews is where it started, and it's never quite taken off. Actually, I always say this, that there's millions of Christian Jews in the world today. So like the idea that that there's no Christian Jews is totally, it is actually very widespread among Jews. It's just they generally don't, Jews who are not Christians, there's obviously, because there's a cultural religious thing, it's hard to be a Christian among the Jews because they don't really want to hear it. They don't really want to be told Jesus is the Messiah. It's like a story that's like well known and in some ways quite painful, because the Jews have suffered at the hands of Christians quite a bit. And a lot of that has to do with that sort of sloppy conversion. It's like, the inefficiencies of converting barbarous people to Christianity resulted in some barbarous forms of Christianity. Because a lot of them become Christians and they become familiar with the rites and things and stuff. It's like, but it's not like they handed out everyone Bibles. There was no printing press. They didn't all get to read it for themselves and learn and like, all right, everybody now read these words and study them. They'd have them read to them, and the idea of what even righteousness is something that is something, in society itself is debated. What is right? What is the right behavior? What is truth? That's the question Pilate asked. Because there are different things that are true and different perspectives. What do you mean by truth? And it's not just a flippant question. It is a deep human question. What is truth? And Jesus' answer was, I am the truth. I am the way of the truth. They didn't say it to Pilate, but that is, he said it to Pilate, I came to bear witness of the truth. So the truth for a Christian is that which Jesus bore witness to. And it's a different form of truth than saying, like, say, this object is orange and black. Even though, of course, in my mind, it's like, to a colorblind person, it may not be. But I could get more fundamental and say, this object consists of wood. It's a wooden stick. It'd be funny that there are a lot of random things I could pull up. You always see it from this perspective. In front of me, there's stuff. All right. So they should go with their flocks and herds to seek the Lord. I wonder if that's flocks and herds, like it's the imagery. Because I think this is somewhat symbolic. They, Israel, Judah. I think about, it makes me think in several things. Like I think of Exodus. Let them come out with their flocks and their herds. Come out of Egypt. It's that idea of wandering in the wilderness with their flocks and their herds. Also, just the idea of taking flocks and herds out to pasture. I mean, and also the idea of just the very idea of a nomadic lifestyle. It's something that is done with flocks and herds. And so to me, I mean, I could interpret it as like they will go, with the people, or like the priests with their flocks. I mean, the shepherds, the pastors. The word, I mean, our very word for a religious leader in American English is generally, we don't have priests, we have pastors in Protestantism, right? There's pastors, pastor this, pastor that, or reverend in some of the other different Reformed traditions. I forgot. I don't know how the reverend title is applied, actually. No one hardly ever calls him reverend. I think it's part of a title. It's like the right reverend so-and-so, It's more of an achievement than it is an actual thing. People, hello, reverend? I don't know. Maybe they do. Maybe they do call him that. Maybe they used to. I don't know. But they don't. Now they go with pastor. It's less, or actually they'll be more like, hey, just call me John. It's much less formal today, which was always a bit of an annoyance to me, because it's, I want kids to call me Mr. Stringini, not Paul. So I wouldn't have dared call an adult by their first name as a kid. I would have expected, I don't know what I would have. I would have expected hell to follow. All right. So, the idea of going out with your flocks, to me, harkens back to the Exodus in some ways, though. More so than this idea of, they will take their congregations. I mean, I could say that, but that doesn't mean much. I mean, I don't think there's a lot of meaning in that interpretation. Let's go, people will look for the Lord all together now. But I think it does say a sort of let's go back to trying to get back to where we were at the beginning. Trying to start over with God. They go with their flocks and their herds. You know what I mean? And go back to the part where we wandered in the wilderness, where we had just come fresh out of Egypt. We were just getting to know God, and we'll try to get to know God again. But they can't find him because he's withdrawn himself from them. And that reminds me of why I said a lot of what I just said, which is we have, and this is an important point. This is all part of the point. Nationally, as a nation, yes, we can be Christian, but our descendants also have some claim to that. They've got some natural claim by having been born into it. My wife and I are both highly dedicated Christians. And so my children are heirs of that. And I see that in that they inherit our, maybe not our zeal, but our conviction, because our zeal comes from conversion. They can't have that experience. I don't know how to give it to them. They'd have to go astray, and I don't want that. You know what I mean? It's a weird thing. I don't want, it's a weird thing being a Christian parent, if you think about it, especially if you're one who converted. Now, I knew a lot of people growing up. I knew kids who were like that, who were inheritors. I remember when I went to the InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, there were all the good Christian kids from my high school were there, a lot of them. Not all, but there were a lot of kids I knew from high school, and they were all the good Christian kids who've been raised in good homes. And I had a decent home, but I had one parent who was godly minded, one who was not. You could say, and that goes to else were your children defiled, though my mother would probably not, would like to assert faith, though it's not. I'm not convinced. All right, let's just put it that way. There were a lot of reasons to doubt, and certainly growing up, there was never any talk from those quarters. But I saw the people who were raised in church, and they were very dedicated, and they were like me, pretty much inheritors, and they were even more so. But I had gone astray. These kids were good kids. They'd done their parents' will. And that's what their parents want. I think my parents also wanted the same, or at least my dad did. And I hope mom never listens to this study, right? No, she had different plans for me, all right? That's the truth. It wasn't such a big concern. Though, like I said, the idea that women were evil and I should stay away from them was definitely something they agreed upon. Though a bad strategy in any case. That's just, when you do that, that's just creates what they call repression. And when you try to repress something by not allowing a feeling that's natural, instead of teaching your child how to deal with feelings, deal with nature, instead of telling them, no, deny it completely. I know, well, Paul says deny yourself. Yes, there are ways in which you deny yourself. But it's like the scriptures say, deny yourself. But it also says, like, let every man, men can have wives and all that. It's like, okay, we have to make the next generation. There is a certain, denying yourself is about denying unrighteous things, not about denying everything that it makes you human. I could say deny yourself, never eat, and see how long that lasts. It's like you can fast and pray and do these things and deny yourself, but you still go back to doing what is perfectly acceptable as a human, which is to feed your body. And also to be married and have a family is also honorable and holy in the Lord. So these kids would grow up Christian, and I saw them, and they didn't go astray. And you don't want that for your kids, right? You don't want them to go astray. But it is kind of powerful when you do, and you return and you come. But you could say, like, well, isn't that kind of like putting the Son of God? Well, because kids go astray often is because the faith is not, they haven't fully embraced it. And even sometimes in their carrying your convictions, it's like because they don't have the same zeal, they don't delve as deeply. They inherit the blessings, but they are, like the people who came out of Egypt, none of them, save Caleb and Joshua, ever even got to enter into the promised land. Not even Moses. He only saw it far off because of the difficulties they had in the wilderness. But their children inherited it. And sometimes your children do inherit. But with that inheritance, there is that inheritance, but it is not like a foregone conclusion. We can go astray, as I went astray in my youth. And, and there is an opportunity for the Lord to take us back. But the thing is, when we go so astray so far, we can go so far astray and so far afield into idolatry and unbelief. And then, once the judgment of God comes, it's like in the book of Revelation, the judgment of God, there is a time where, like in the parables of Jesus, where the virgins come knocking on the door and say, or they go to the wise virgins and say, our lights are going out, give us of your oil. And they say, go to them that sell. And they go to them and sell, and they come back and it's too late. There is like an expiration on these things, there is, I don't like drawing hard lines because the scripture doesn't give you a lot of hard lines to look at. It's kind of vague where this point of no return is. From the New Testament, from other, I know God will, we can sin quite a bit, and He will forgive us. And I should say, when I went astray, I didn't reject the Lord. I was just very sinful. I I wasn't like, God, I wasn't like, and I was defensive about more zealous Christians. People would make fun of zealous Christians. I'd be like, hey man, cut it out. I had this sort of superstitious, and I've seen it in other people who were not very zealous Christians, but they still had this sort of superstitious respect for anyone who was. Because like they kind of knew there was something. They knew that they were, I knew that I was. At least subconsciously, I knew it's like I had gone astray a bit. I didn't even, though I didn't think of myself as gone astray. I just thought of myself as I was just mindlessly seeking the things that the world offered that seemed tantalizing, pretty much. That's the whole story of it. I was just drawn away of temptation. So, but when we go so far afield, rejecting the Lord, especially when you reject, it's the depths of sin is not so much about, yes, your lust and all those things, but it's like the gods we serve. And we can serve gods of lust. They can get that far. You know what I mean? It's like, and when we go too far afield in all these things, there is levels of corruption which divide us from God, where he may not hear us in the depths of our depravity. Now, they look at the Apostle Paul. He was seeking to destroy Christians. Yes, even from the very depths of depravity, God can lift us. But there is no guarantee he's going to do that in the depths of our depravity. And Israel had gone to great depths of depravity, where such depths that even if they should seek God, they couldn't find him. You know what I mean? That happens. And that can happen even now. These things don't change. People can go to such depths and then all of a sudden decide, like, well, now I'm gonna look for God. There's no guarantee he's going to be there. You know what I mean? There's no guarantee that he's going to be there to reach out and save us when we suddenly realize we need him. You know what I mean? That's why, and that's why I started this off saying, like, you who seek the Lord, don't apply this to yourself. You who try to serve him, just because your transgressions that I will say are minor, but no matter how major you see them, in the depths of your depravity, he was there for you. You know what I mean? When you were actually a real sinner and depraved, he reached out and saved you. How much more now when you are struggling to perfect holiness in the fear of God in all humility. They have dealt treacherously against the Lord, for they have begotten strange children. Now shall a month devour them with their portions. Their flocks and their children. It's like they're all they possess. The idea of going out with your flocks is like with all you possess, like a nomadic type of thing. It reminds me of that. We will come out of Egypt with our flocks and with our children and with all our portions, with our stuff. We're going to take everything up. It also reminds me of going to captivity, though when you go into captivity, you go in naked. You don't go with your flocks. So this is the idea that they're going to sort of head out and search after God. And this is what I've been talking about the whole time, and I was setting this up very well, I think. They've begotten strange children. Their children are strange to me. You know what I mean? And that's what happens is that's why I know people, or I know someone in particular, who was raised in a Christian denomination. But they were estranged. They were essentially estranged from the faith. There was no zeal. There was no nothing, because their parents were also the same. Parents had no zeal. Their parents were going to church out of historic obligation, and they themselves had no zeal at all for it. And never spoke of it outside of that place. They weren't like the kids in my fellowship group who've been Christians all their lives, whose parents were zealous, and they inherited. But at the same measure, to me, that made those people more boring, because they were so they weren't, like, to me, the word, I was so excited about the word. You know what I mean? Because I was zealous for it. I was zealous to study the Bible. I was excited about God's word. I was excited about what God was doing in the world, what I thought at the time. And I was hungry to meet other people who were zealous, and the lack of zeal on the part of these people who had taken their faith more seriously was perplexing to me. But it has to do with being the children of faithful parents. It's like they haven't gone majorly astray. The young ladies are virgins, and so are the young men, and they wear their button-down shirts and their hair all nicely trimmed, because I would, I was, in high school I had long hair and was in a rock band and wanted to live in rock and roll lifestyle, So much so that people, when they saw me show up there, I'd never expect to see you here. I never expect to see you holding a Bible and quoting verses. Because they didn't even, and there are a lot of guys like that where it's like, I had no idea that guy was a Christian or anything close to it. But what they were was just like me. I read their testimony and I was like, oh yeah, he was like me. It was like there was faith in his life, but sort of like not. Fly actually went on the camera, not to the extent that that it was like meaningful. And they probably assigned some meaning to it, just as I did, but they weren't zealous for it. But these people have a faithfulness and zeal that's sort of a baseline, and they're good kids. And you want your kids to be like that. I don't want my kids to go astray. But for them to be as zealous as me, they'd have to. They'd have to go down to the depths of depravity. And I don't want that. And it doesn't have to be. They don't have to be that kind of Christian. They can partake of the promise. They have more of the divine nature in them at their age than I did. By all means. So when we are unfaithful to the Lord, when our minds are corrupted as many of our parents are, right? And you end up, we live in this Christian society, but there's teenagers. When I was growing up, there's all kinds of teenage sex going on. Now, it wasn't anywhere near as widespread as I believed at the time. I didn't realize how actually it's still a great minority that are involved in this stuff. But nowadays, it's much worse, no doubt. It is much worse. There's much more fornication going on among kids at a younger age, or more of them younger involved in this stuff, and it's because, and sometimes they're Christian kids and stuff, yeah. But but a lot of it has to do with society. We all are, like I said, it's like, I know so many fornicators that are also Christians that, like I said, you could walk into a suburb and you could, throw a brick and you're going to hit a Christian home. Right? And it's hard to throw a brick without hitting a Christian home. Let's put it that way. And, but how Christian it is, how zealous they are. I know plenty of people who love Jesus, and they also love their fornication and drinking and partying and profanity and any number of abominations are going on in their lives, and they approve of other they're so headed down the path of abomination that their kids are not that different. And the danger is as to if and I think about in particular some people I'm thinking about, like if they didn't have Dad, who's gone, not his fault, by the way, but like, if he wasn't zealous, well, they'd be in trouble. Because as we love Jesus and we love fornication thing is not a really compatible thing with salvation, ultimately. It can lead us to destruction, and your children become strange to the Lord. They're the children of strangers. They're like heathen. And for the Jews, that would be very deadly. But as Christians, when we're raised in the faith, we become like them. Our children become also sort of like inheritors. That's why Paul, like I said, the whole, else will your children defiled. What's the opposite of defiled? Sanctified. My children are sanctified by the faith of my wife and I. They are sanctified. They are made holy. That means they are separate. They are dedicated to the Lord already because of our faith. And I see it in them. You know what I mean? They already have a lot of fear, respect. They walk more righteously than I did as a kid. There's so much more because my wife and I and our zeal, and we didn't cram it down their throats even. They just sort of inherit it because of our faith. And that's how it is. And so that's what happens. Strange children. I don't even know these kids. They're strange to me. Their children are like foreigners. They should be my people. It's like you come home from, like, a guy goes off to war and he comes back to his wife and she's got like kids and they're not his. She'd been busy while he was gone. Now shall a month. So a lot of life is divided into months, right? I mean, this one's easy for me. A month devour you. Every month I feel like I'm going to get devoured. The months come and they eat. The bills come due. Every month presents its own challenge. Yeah, we divide our lives into these months. All our bills come monthly. You know what I mean? Everything's like this month cycle. Month. Oh, God. Sometimes it's just like days turn into weeks. Weeks turn into months. Months turn into years. And it's relentless. But a single month can be your undoing. That's what he's saying. A month will devour them. Because it's all going to come down in 1 month. There's certain times of year when kings would go out to war, and that's probably has to do with, like, that when the Assyrian arrives, his conquest is going to be so fast he accomplishes it in like a month. Blow you the cornet in Gibeah, a kind of horn, and the trumpet in Ramah. And again, it's not going to be our good old brass three valve trumpet, but like I said, like similar kinds of things, right? I mean, animal horn type things. Cry aloud in Bethaven after the O Benjamin. These place names, Gibeah is sometimes called Gibeah of Saul, and they are fortress cities. There are cities that, like, when you come through the land, you don't need to, the villages, you just ransack them, no problem. But the fortress cities are the ones that have to be dealt with, because they are which command the land. If your army ignores them, it can get you from behind. You have to take the fortified cities. And so this is, there's a lot of blow the trumpet scriptures. Joel, blow the trumpet in Zion. Sound the alarm in my holy mountain. Let all the inhabitants of the land tremble for the day of the Lord. It cometh, it is nigh at hand. And that day was the coming of the Assyrian. And again, the Assyrian and all these prophecies are types of the ultimate. The Assyrian is a type of Antichrist, is a type of Satan. Just as the whoring of Israel has its correspondent in the great whore of Revelation. In fact, thankfully he's going to bring that up again. We will cover that. We will take a deeper look at that relationship as we continue. But the blowing of the trumpets, again, that also has its answer in Revelation. There are the 7 trumpets. Trumpets are signals. These are the fortress cities. Gibeah. Now, I can tell you things about the history of Gibeah. Gibeah, because it's like, Gibeah was an interesting place. It was a city inhabited by Benjamites, but it was in Ephraim. And there you go. That shows you how there was like, though it was the land of Ephraim, there were Benjamites in it. Same thing with the Judah. The Israelites were all over the place. It was like there was a portion given to Ephraim by inheritance, but there was no like, thou shalt not intermarry between the tribes. And there was no, thou shalt not live in another city just because you're of one tribe. It was portion given out to the tribes initially, but there's no reason that you can't live in a land allotted to Ephraim, I guess. Because the city of Gibeah was inhabited by Benjamites. And there's this notable story in the book of Judges about basically a Sodom and Gomorrah-like incident that occurs there. And blow you the trumpet in Gibeah. So it means signal that there's danger coming. That's the point of trumpets, and that's something I point out in Revelation. A trumpet is a signal. It's got to give a clear sound so you understand what it means. I often use the different trumpet signals they used in the military. They still use them. I think they play revelry in the morning. Probably just it's traditional, and I don't know. If they blast it through I was going to say boom box, but that is outdated, is it not? Blast it through a speaker system or whatever. I don't know. Or not, or whether someone gets up and plays it, which is a lot cooler. And they play taps at night, da 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 da, and everyone knows what it means. The charge, all right. I'm not good at singing the charge. And the treat, I forgot what the retreat sounds like. I said the treat, which is funny. All right, so. But they wouldn't have had those in ancient times. Those precise trumpets called. But the point, trumpets don't just blow. There's signal. 2 long blasts followed by 3 short blasts indicates whatever. As we have we have sirens that warn of tornadoes in the Midwest, or earthquakes in the earthquake zones, or whatever. Fire alarms, bells, whistles, signals. Trumpets were used for that. Call to battle. The men of arms, be ready. The threat has arrived. The Lord's vengeance is upon us. It mentions Benjamin here because, again, Gibeah was a city of Benjamites in Mount Ephraim. And you just use a concordance, look up Gibeah, and you can find those references. But it was known as Gibeah of Saul, and I believe it was one of Saul's fortress cities, is probably the idea. And same thing with Ramah. Bethaven. Bethel was also a major city. Ephraim shall be desolate in the day of rebuke. Among the tribes of Israel have I made known that which shall surely be. Again, in the day when God's wrath comes, Ephraim's going to be totally wiped out. He's going to be desolate in that time. And then the prophet, I look at this is what's going to happen. This is what's coming. The princes of Judah were like them that removed the bound. Not much time. Therefore I will pour out my wrath upon them like water. This is an important verse. I almost hate throwing here at the end, but I can cover it in 5 minutes or more. And I suppose if you had to go at 8, you're already gone, aren't you? So, and I don't know. The thing is, I never I know that there's some way to tell how many people are watching. I don't bring that thing up because I always feel like I shouldn't look at the stream because I already have such a tenuous connection. So I never have an idea how many people are watching. I know one person is watching, and that's what's important to me. As long as I've got one, then I have a reason to do it. Though it'd probably be good for me to do it with no one watching, which would be funny, but it'd be funny because it'd be kind of pathetic. He's sitting there talking to himself. Nobody cares. But that's fine. It would still be good. It's good to sit there and take counsel. Okay, so we'll pick it up with verse 11 next time. But verse 10. They're like them that remove the bound. There's a law in the Old Testament about removing boundary markers. Something people would do, moving boundary markers. In fact, I think remove means to move. It means to move from its proper location, to remove it. That means just take it away. What are you going to do with it? Boundary markers were usually things like big stones and stuff. It's a form of stealing. It's deceit. They move the boundary. But it's a metaphor, right? I mean, it's an obvious metaphor. It's for what people do to this very day. They move the boundaries. For years I always said that, people were saying the morality of our times is worse than ever. The 2000 00s and the teens. And we're in the teens still. But there has been this... two things, I will say. Two things. There has been a rapid acceleration now of I think, and I don't know that it's worse than any. I do think there are more debauched times in history, certainly. I don't know about the whole. I mean, the world used to be a lot more dangerous place, but I mean, there's certain sins that are, you know, like I said, we don't take sins off the books, per se. I mean, Jesus did, in a sense, you could say, like, the dietary restrictions were taken off the books, right? But there are certain carnal commandments which don't count. And we could say, like, well, but there's some things that have always been. If fornication is a sin, then every other abomination that they approve of in this time is also a sin. It's very easy. Because, you don't make it better by calling that which is not a marriage, you know. But Judah is like them that move the bounds. See, they move the boundaries. We also have this saying, we say you're moving the goalposts, you know. It's a bit of treachery that's always really annoying when someone moves the goalposts or moves the boundaries, right? They're changing the standards by which things are judged. They're changing the standards by which the end result will be achieved. You know, that's happened to Jacob a lot in Laban in his story, which is, we were talking about that the other day, just briefly. But, Laban kept asking for more and changing the deal and moving the goalposts. And Jacob, only because he was so clever, he was able to outwit him. But, people change the goals. They change the boundaries. And just as reprehensible as that is in life, someone like moves the, fortunately these days, we have steel pins they drop on the ground and everything is very carefully marked out. But it was a little more trusting back then. We'll just roll a stone and that's your land's on this side, mine's on that side. This is the corner. We'll agree this, and we agree, and then a year or two later, you're out there at night with your sons rolling the stone in the direction of something else. I remember, I have like a little stone that was put at the corner of my property when I moved out here. I noticed there was a stone, and I'm like, I think that's sort of like a boundary marker, even though I know the properties are actually marked off by pins. Steel pins in the ground, which they find with metal detectors, I assume. The surveyor will go out and locate the pin under the ground, and they use that for survey. And they could be moved, I suppose. But I mean, it is a reprehensible thing. It is a very sinful thing. And because there's a certain, you establish what righteousness is, and then you don't change the standard. Because there is still a call to righteousness in the way we eat, in the way we dress, in all these things, all right? But it's judged by a different standard. And certainly, because we are, and the reason that we don't follow those dietary laws is because we were Gentiles, and that was determined that Gentiles did not have to become Jews. So it's not really changing a standard of righteousness. What they just agreed that was those things never made you righteous to begin with, unless you were a Jew, because it was part of what it meant to be a Jew. But to be a Christian, Gentiles did not have to become Jews. That was the decision. And so, therefore, there's no requirement that I do those laws. It's not a change in standard of righteousness. It's the fact, what it is God has opened his arms to people who were hitherto rejected. Because they were strange to him, strange children. We were estranged from God, living in ignorance and darkness, our ancestors. The princes of Judah were like them that removed the bound. And our leaders to this day are like that. They're moving the boundaries, and they're willing to go with it. It's pathetic though. It's like, think about it. All the people that they were opposed to this fake marriage thing. I'm gonna call. I'm avoiding using certain language because I know that YouTube has scanning algorithms. Not that it matters because I don't monetize my content. I can't. I don't know if I would. I had an opportunity to monetize my other channel years ago, and I didn't, which is fine because I would have been removed from the program because I still don't have 10,000 subscribers on that channel either, even though I have hundreds. Anyways. But, you know, they all opposed fake marriage until all of a sudden it was legal, and then they're all for it. Right? And now we have what? Insanity. Now it's going insane. As far as people are just do insane things. Like the thought that I could just sit here and say, because I feel like a woman, I am one. And you must regard me as such. And I can walk into any bathroom I like. Like that, the thought that that's something plausible we would allow people to do. We're just going to allow men to put wigs on. I mean, you think about it. You can let some creeper dress up like a girl and go into the ladies' bathroom. Somebody who's either an insincere creep or mentally deranged. You know what I mean? I don't know that you necessarily want those folks in the bathroom with your little boys either. You know what I mean? It's like, but those guys already have access to your bathroom. You know, we already knew that they were possibly there, so you're already on the watch. We don't expect is when you send. I always used to feel good, like, well, the ladies' room. The ladies are there to help. You know what I mean? You send your little girl into the ladies' room, you think nothing of it. Like, well, you know, it'd be fine. You know, I would always accompany my boys into the boys' room because there's, like, you know, creepy guys. Women, not so much. Not so likely. Not so likely. Because it's the nature of it's human nature. Men are much more corrupt in that regard. And, you know, you think about it. And then nowadays it's like, oh, now I got to think about that too. I can't just send them in because there might be some creep in a wig and a dress. That's all he has to do. That's all he's got to do to have access to intimate areas. Put on a wig and a dress and spout off some nonsense. Like, doesn't strike anybody like that. That might be an incredibly stupid thing to just, like, that's the standard. Like, if you're creepy enough to put on a dress, you know, I mean, I'm not saying, like, someone might be sincerely out of their mind and think that they are, you know, a dog or a female or something that they're not. And maybe there's no creepy motive behind it at all. I'm not saying that that doesn't happen. Of course not. But I'm saying sometimes it's just some creep. Right? You know, and our leaders are thinking this is a good thing. Some of them. You know? We still have a lot of fight though. You know, there's still a fight going on. We're not that. See, the thing is, we're still not anywhere near as morally corrupt as Israel was. I still assert that as wild as these times are, as it is getting worse. We are definitely getting worse, and I do think I've always believed that. But it's still not. It still could get a lot worse than this. I still maintain my belief about that. I don't think that means we're heading into the end times. It might just mean what all it means is our society is on a downward spiral towards greater and greater abominations, and we will see where it ends up, won't we? Anyways, we will pick it up with verse 11. You know, therefore I will pour out my wrath on them like water. Don't need to explain it much. And this goes back to the verse we started with. In my mind, their pride tests. This isn't wrong. What I do is right. I won't hear the rebuke of prophets and of wiser men. I will not hear it. And they think, oh, we've moved the bounds, therefore it's all acceptable. And they think God has come along for the ride. You know, and generally maybe they don't even believe in God, but they think they can just move the boundaries and God won't notice that the boundary's been moved. But God notices the moved boundaries. He notices little things like that. You know, they don't go away. You're not allowed to just change things. and the wrath will not. The wrath will come. The wrath will come. Can't change the boundaries. The wrath will still come. You only fool yourself. You only look in the mirror in your pride and say, am I not clever? Am I not right? So we will pick this up with verse 11 tomorrow. And I do sincerely hope to be here at the regular time. Thanks for joining me. I look forward to joining with you then.
Nevertheless, the dimness shall not be such as was in her vexation, when at the first he lightly afflicted the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, and afterward did more grievously afflict her by the way of the sea beyond Jordan, in Galilee of the nations.